All right, we're going to bring back Jim Avila, who is co-hosting the show today, as we also welcome a former KGO talk show host and presidential historian, John Rothman. Good morning to you, John Rothman.
Good morning, and good morning, Jim. Delighted to be with you, too.
Hey, John. Good to meet you.
How? You guys have never met before. Wow.
No, I've listened, but I've never met him, no.
And I've watched and listened to Jim over the years with great pleasure.
Thank you.
You are both wonderful political minds. So let me throw this story at you because it was a big announcement this morning. President Biden says the United States is indeed planning to send 31 Abrams tanks to Ukraine. Germany then following suit. They were kind of saying they would if the U.S. would. Well, we are, so they are. Germany will be sending 14 Leopard 2 tanks from its own stock to Ukraine. And they're calling it a landmark moment after a couple weeks of pretty hard pressure on Germany from NATO allies to send these tanks. So is this a good idea that the world is now offering up tanks?
No alternative. We have to. But I want to explain the Russians are very worried because the question is, are we crossing, for their point of view, a red line? I have to tell you, this is a proxy war. That's the way it's been fought. It's no longer a proxy war in my judgment, because the minute you put American tanks in there, and by the way, we are doing the training here in the United States for the Ukrainians who will person those tanks. So it is an escalation. I'm going to be watching very carefully to see how the Russians respond. And we need to know that our European allies are just as worried as we are. Remember that just a few days ago, Medvedev, the former president of Russia, who is one of the top aides to Vladimir Putin, spoke directly about nuclear possibilities in this war and said whether we win or lose, that remains an option. And that worries the Europeans and the Americans, as it should.
It worries me.
Yeah, well, if you're giving tanks and military equipment, is the next step personnel. And once you start sending troops, are we in World War III? And how far away are we from that?
The administration has said they will not send troops. NATO is not prepared to engage. Remember, whatever we do under the cover of NATO. I'm reminded that Donald Trump talked about withdrawing from NATO. We now see the fallacy of that statement by former President Trump. I think it is very important to understand that troops are not engaged. But, and it's a big but, what if an accident takes place and NATO becomes directly involved? Then we are involved. That's Article 8. If one NATO ally is attacked, all of us become involved. So this is a real juggling match. I noticed that just the other day, the nuclear scientists who keep that nuclear clock said this is the closest we have come to a nuclear confrontation since forever. So it is something that needs to be thought about and directed and understood in the context of how serious it is.
Jim, you say you're worried too?
I mean, I agree, John. I don't know what the answer is. This is probably the most difficult political situation that any president faces. The last time we had something like this was in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Fortunately, we thought, and I think I said this to Mark a while ago, is that we used to think that Nikita Khrushchev was crazy. He was the guy banging his shoe on at the UN. But in the Cuban Missile Crisis, he actually calmed things down and negotiated in secret with Kennedy, and they were able to negotiate an agreement that stopped the missiles from being there and averted nuclear war. The problem now is that Putin is crazy and totally unpredictable. It doesn't seem, if he's ill, like some people believe he is, does he care if he starts a nuclear war? Does he care that it'll wipe out both countries and maybe much of the world? I am, look, I agree with you that it's very difficult not to send in tanks, but it's worrisome. It really is a dangerous move, and it will mean more losses for the Russians. And the more we put them in a corner, the more dangerous Putin is, and that's an issue.
I agree with you. I want to remind you, one of the reasons that Khrushchev reacted the way he did is because he was in charge in the Ukraine during World War II, and he understood the implications of war. And he was absolutely committed to the idea that there would not be a world war. It was because of Khrushchev's own experience. And of course, we did a side deal with the Jupiter missiles in Turkey, and we agreed to withdraw those, which was not announced, but it was a quid pro quo, if you will. With Putin, and Jim is absolutely spot on, there is no predictability about Vladimir Putin, and that's the problem. He is not rational on many levels, and we're just going to have to see how this plays out.
What do you think the condition of sorry, Kim, what do you, John, what do you think the condition of Putin is right now? We just had on the screen here one of the listeners, viewers, saying that there's rumors that he may be dead or or incapacitated. I don't think it's that far along, but what do you think?
He's very much in control. And here's the difference. The difference is that when Khrushchev was overthrown in October of 1964 by Brezhnev and Kosygin, there was a Politburo which was able to take a vote, and Khrushchev had to abide by the vote. There is no Politburo today. So Putin rules as one man. And the real question for those of us who used to be Kremlinologists, I don't think it's possible today to have any scientific basis for it, but I think the real question is, if Vladimir Putin vanished today, who would succeed? And if it were to be former President Medvedev, then we have to understand that he is as logically positioned to start a nuclear conflagration as was Putin. It's a very complicated business, Jim, and I have to tell you bluntly, I'm glad that we have the kind of allies that we have, the fact that NATO exists, the fact that Europe is united with the United States. This makes a big difference and will cause Putin, and I think anyone who might succeed him, to reconsider. In the meantime, there will be a major offensive as soon as winter is over. Remember, Napoleon was destroyed by the Russian winter. Hitler was destroyed by the Russian winter. We now have a winter that is brutal in Ukraine, and the question becomes, what will happen when the spring offensive begins? Will the Ukrainians be ready or not? One other quick point. We just had a major scandal in Ukraine, and Mr. Zelensky has had to remove many of his key aides, people who have really been right there with him. What does that mean about the unity of Ukraine? What does it mean about their command structure? There are so many unanswered questions, so many issues to be concerned, but we teeter on the brink of catastrophe. Let's not also forget that the Ukrainian nuclear power plant, which provides the energy, the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, is also under siege. So there are many imponderables, many questions to remain unanswered. And the interesting thing is, among the people who I know who are experts, all of them say the same thing I say. God help us all.
There's a lot of talk about these tanks and what type of weaponry is being sent. And Eric writes that the Leopard tanks were designed to counter the type of equipment that Russia uses. I didn't know that. Is that the case?
That is correct. And the question is, how long does it train? Do you need to train to be able to properly use a Leopard tank? How do you get the spare parts to them? There are a whole series of issues. The basic military strategists that I've listened to on the various networks are saying it will take 2 to 3 months before Ukraine is really able to use those materials. And then, of course, we know the Russians are going to go after them tooth and nail. So it's a lot of imponderables. It's not a good situation. And the tragedy that is unfolding today in Ukraine is one which should stir the conscience of the world.
Let's jump.
It does seem like it has. I mean, just to follow on that point, it's pretty much Russia on its own, except for maybe some outlaw states like Iran and North Korea. Even China has distanced itself from the Russian effort. So he is on his own, but he doesn't seem to mind. You know,
he doesn't care. He doesn't have to care. He really doesn't. And by the way, you heard the other little bit of news, and it's all secondhand here. This is not definitive, that North Korea is now providing weaponry to Russia. Right. Can you imagine North Korea giving weaponry to Russia? I mean, it's mind-boggling. Yeah.
It's kind of backward.
Russia, when I studied in the Soviet Union in 1969, so it's many years ago, Russia was considered a major world power. And I came back to the United States and was asked my view. And I said, listen, it may be a nuclear power, but it's not a world power. Its economy in those days was in shambles. You couldn't get luxury goods. The GUM department store was packed with lines of foreigners, not with Russians. It's a very interesting situation to be a major military power and yet not to have the economic muscle that the United States of America has. And people ask me, what's the difference? The answer is the United States has the deepest pockets of any nation in the world. And our economy is the backbone of the world economy, and the world is conscious of that. And by the way, Jim, to go back to your point about China, China is aware of that too. If we pull the plug on China, they're in deep trouble, and they know it.
I believe China yesterday was talking about the U.S. debt and said we need to figure it out ourselves. Did you see that story?
Sure. And look, the debt is a major problem, but for most Americans, the debt is a far distant thing. And remember, the reason for that is the American economy, no matter what our debt, is the backbone of the world's economy.
I see you have a lot of books back there and papers. Have you checked for classified documents?
Yeah, I've had several emails from people who want to know if I have anything from the Nixon days, and the answer is no. I can assure you I have nothing. But
Yeah.
I want you to know that we are facing now is the need for real controls on what people take out of the White House. Remember, this is now primarily applying to former presidents and former vice presidents. And there's no question, if a former president or vice president wants to take material, nobody's going to stop them. I mean, that's the
Well,
simple
now
answer.
you've got all the former presidents looking. I was reading an article that the Bush family said today, yeah, we don't have anything. We left it all behind.
Yep, Obama said the same thing. Clinton said the same thing. But it's amazing. Have you been through your closet lately? You know, you never know what you're going to find.
Gotta check. You never know how those things sneak up on you.
But I have nothing. I have nothing from the Nixon days in my archive, which is considerable, which would be reflective of that situation.
And I was talking to David K. Johnson yesterday, who refutes this, but there's a headline on CNN today that says that Trump and Biden teams are both jumping on the Pence disclosure of documents as a classified documents defense. I look at the situations as different. I mean, even the disclosure that, you know, Biden and Pence have the documents, the way it was disclosed by their own people, the way they, you know, went in and found them and immediately turned them over, completely different than the Trump case. But now, apparently, since everyone has them, it's going to be like, oh, well, that guy had it, so it's not a big deal.
Well, you're right, but let me explain very simply. It's now not a question of national security. It's a question of partisan politics. And that's what it boils down to. Democrats are going to attack Republicans. Republicans are going to attack Democrats. And in the end, what needs to happen is there has to be a tightening up of security in the White House, primarily in the White House, although, and let me be, if you'll pardon the expression, perfectly clear, the question that we deal with also in members of Congress, because members of Congress also have access to highly classified information. And how do you control all of that? I mean, there is a proliferation of this problem, and I have a feeling it's going to grow, and it will require legislation and, yes, real training by all of those involved with what you do with these kinds of highly classified documents.
Yeah, and I think again, they're going to have to prove intent. Does it help Biden in some way? I think it does help him in that he and Pence have both handled it in exactly the same way. And that kind of gives credence to when Biden's people say, look, it was a mistake and we've turned it over and we've searched and we've allowed the FBI to search and nobody's stopping or calling the FBI, you know, black-booted thugs from the Democratic side. As far as Trump is concerned, I don't know. I mean, yes, does it kind of muddy the waters a little bit? But if it ever gets to court, it's always been difficult. The most difficult part is going to be to prove intent. What was Trump doing? Was he going to try to sell them? Was he going to try to use them as a blackmail? Was he going to try to embarrass people with them? Was he going to use them politically? Or was it a vanity project? You know, as much as, you know, much as he deserves to go to jail, there is some credence to just the fact that he is insanely egotistical and just wanted to have these things to show to his friends. He is, so that's a possibility, and they may be able to prove that, or the Justice Department may have a difficulty proving that it wasn't that. And I think, the chances of him going to jail over the documents, in my opinion, are slim. I think he's more in trouble in Atlanta, and he's more in trouble with the January 6th hearings.
100%.
Trying to overturn. But
we agree,
that's
Jim.
we
agree completely. There's no dispute there. I had hoped that by the time we did this broadcast, the results from Georgia from the grand jury would be out. They're talking about indictments, but we're just going to have to wait and see. And I agree with Jim completely on the January 6th report, and what Merrick Garland and the Justice Department decide to do with that will be critical. But you and I are on the same page, Jim, on that.
I have a vision of legislative staffers right now furiously searching offices and homes. Right now, there's a flurry of people just looking for documents. You think that's what's happening?
Yeah, very likely. Very likely. And it makes great sense. But let's keep focused on the critical question. And I think you nailed it, Jim, when you talked about intent. What was the intent of Biden or Pence? It was not malicious or dangerous. In the case of Donald Trump, let me remind you, he said these documents are mine.
Yeah.
They belong to me. And that is not what
that's not true.
That's not what the law says.
Right.
When Richard Nixon tried to assert that privilege, Congress responded and immediately passed laws during the Ford and Carter years on presidential records, the Presidential Records Act. That is clearly not the case. But look, Donald Trump has so many problems now, and this whole issue is, look, may I just give you one other example? It really bothered me. I have low blood pressure. So in order to stimulate myself, aside from the Mark Thompson show, I listen to Fox News.
Oh,
they are
that ought to do it.
Well, it's an oxymoron to call Fox and news. It's just an oxymoron. Yeah. You would think that Joe Biden was the biggest disaster that ever hit and the most incompetent. I mean, it's astounding. But the real issue here is half of the American people, if that's the real number, I don't know if it is, who listen to Fox are getting complete misinformation, or if you will, myth information. And it is that kind of thing which breeds the conspiracy theories, which takes care of the radical right. I know that one of the things you wanted us to comment on are these congressional appointments. And the Speaker of the House has the power and has removed, and I want to just focus on Adam Schiff because he is a central figure, removing him from the Intelligence Committee, a man who's been chairman of the Intelligence Committee, while putting Marjorie Taylor Greene into a critical position in the House of Representatives. Now, look, I don't care whether you're a partisan, not a
She's a real deep thinker, John. She's a real deep thinker.
But she's
she should be in a position of power on the Intelligence Committee. That's what we need.
No, I know she wants to investigate those Jewish space lasers. Yeah. I'm thinking to myself, but the accountability for Kevin McCarthy is interesting. And you may know that in his district here in California, they are now having to bring in water because of pollution and so forth. That ought to be a major issue and a major scandal. And so there are a lot, it's just a double standard here, and I've learned to live with it. But I urge people to spend a minute. This morning, just to give you an example, CNN was focused on Ukraine, as we were, thanks to you, Kim, at the beginning of the program. What is Fox talking about? They're talking about Joe Biden. They're talking about Joe Biden's issues and whether or not Hunter Biden is involved in all of this. And is it a cover-up? I mean,
it's fascinating to flip back and forth and just see what the crawl is at the bottom of the screen. Yeah.
Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in for fun.
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention that. And one of the things I find to be asinine and hypocritical is that one of the reasons Kevin McCarthy is saying he is going to ban Congressman Swalwell and Congressman Schiff from the Intelligence Committee is because he says they've been dishonest.
Oh, dishonest. Wait a minute. Dishonest?
Well, you got the chief dishonest guy in the Republican Party from New York, Mr. Santos. So how can you, on one hand, say, well, this guy, we're just going to let him in. We're going to swear him in. Everything's fine. We'll let the ethics committee handle it. And on the other hand, say these two respected congressmen, who have served the country, they're dishonest. I just don't, it doesn't jive with me.
A 4-vote margin in the House of Representatives, and the recognition that if Santos is either resigns or is expelled, and by the way, both of those possibilities remain real, that district would flip to the Democrats. So that is the reason why we are in the position that we're in. Pure and simple, it's politics. And all I can say, to be very blunt with you, is Santos is a disgrace. There are a couple of Republicans who have stood up and said they will not vote for the removal of those two from the Intelligence Committee, and God bless them. I hope the American people learn a lesson. But we are so divided. We are so partisan. I've never seen anything like it in all the years I've been in politics and all the presidents that I've studied. We've never had this kind of partisanship so deeply and profoundly affecting everything that we do.
Right now, Albert's looking for, I've never seen anything like this before, drop. I don't know if you can find it in time. Yeah, I mean, it is wild. Jim, what are you thinking?
Well, a couple of things on McCarthy. And it was pretty cool that Gavin Newsom actually called him out yesterday. Yes. Here's this California guy, hadn't made any calls to either Half Moon Bay or to Monterey Park after the shootings for condolences, had not even mentioned it. And Newsom called him out pretty strongly on that. I thought that was great. McCarthy has said now about Santos that his red line is if he is charged criminally. And that may very well happen very soon. I guess he did make some changes on his Federal Elections Commission document today or yesterday, and it was reported today.
That's correct. He called it a personal loan, and now he's saying it wasn't.
Right. Now he's saying, but he didn't say where it came from.
Right.
Didn't say where the money came from.
Well, okay, where'd you get that money?
I believe in the media conspiracy, Jim. You didn't write him a check, did you?
Yeah, no, that would have been you, John Rothmann.
Oh, that would have been
yeah. It's
doesn't he have to say where it came from, though, Jim?
Well, they can charge him with some FEC complaint, but the FEC is pretty toothless. It's not. Yeah. Mostly they do fines and things like that. Could it be? I don't know if I don't think that that's a charge that they will be able to charge in Long Island. I think the Long Island DAs are more looking at fraud and some of the other things that he's done, such as stolen the GoFundMe money from a vet who needed the money and he stole it instead. Those type of things. So he may be indicted soon. In the meantime, he probably is doing the Democrats a lot of good. It really does reveal the duplicity of the Republican Party, and it's probably not hurting the Democrats very much to have him there, since it's not the deciding vote. There's three votes besides him. Yeah. So I think it's not hurting us very much.
Let me just say, one Republican member of Congress is now out ill for at least the next month, according to what I'm reading. That brings the margin down to theoretically 2. You have some Republicans that are obviously restive, and that's why Kevin McCarthy is doing everything he can to prop himself up. I understand his logic, but what a disgrace that a Speaker of the House hangs like this. It's just terrible.
And you're
right, Jim. Let me just say, Jim, you were absolutely right. When this call out by Gavin Newsom of a fellow Californian was so effective and so powerful, which leads us, of course, to the question, is Gavin Newsom's future, which is something we all speculate about.
Well, and that's something, Jim, that you had mentioned to me earlier this morning. Would Gavin Newsom be a good candidate for president, right?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think Gavin Newsom will be great in the debates, will be a great spokesperson for the progressive wing of the party. Whether or not Gavin Newsom, and he's going to have to, if he can go to the center enough to be a Biden replacement if Joe Biden decides not to run, or if something happens where he doesn't run, is an open question. I mean, you have to see how he does. I mean, he is susceptible, unfortunately, Gavin Newsom, to being a Californian, number one, a liberal, number two, too pretty, number three, and too associated with the progressive kind of quote unquote. He's susceptible to the elite
Right.
label.
Please
And
don't forget
that-
his own personal scandals. Please don't forget that. Although they are not national, you can be certain that if he runs, all of that will be rehashed.
Well, enlighten me on that, John. Besides going to the French Laundry during the COVID-19
He had an affair.
epidemic,
He had an affair with the wife of one of his key aides. Well, there are a whole series of things that Gavin has done, which were done in his younger years, if you will, but nonetheless remain, for those of us who live in San Francisco,
sure.
Yeah.
you know, it's there. And you can be sure that the Republicans are doing everything they can to pull that up. The advantage that Gavin has, and you're absolutely right, is he's very smooth. He's been ahead of a number of issues. He's very solid on a lot of the ability to argue and debate. And of course, does anybody remember who's run against him for governor of California? The Republicans were never able to run anybody who could even come near him. So,
yeah, I think he's a strong candidate. I do think he has his weaknesses, and you're right about the personal scandals and all that. I'm sure the opposition research will be out there right away.
Don't forget
but it
Kamala
depends who's
Harris.
running against.
Yeah.
If
Don't
he's running
forget
against Donald
Kamala.
Trump.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
But
go ahead.
I just want to point out, which is, I think, a very interesting dimension here. If something happens to Joe Biden, God forbid, Kamala Harris becomes president of the United States. The last incumbent vice president who became president of the United States to be denied nomination was in 1884. It was Chester Alan Arthur. We do not displace vice presidents who become president. And it's very hard to displace a sitting president. Remember when Ronald Reagan ran against Gerald Ford or Teddy Kennedy challenged Jimmy Carter. Once you're in the Oval Office, it's very hard to be displaced. So for Gavin Newsom, it's a waiting game. It's a question of, one, what does Joe Biden do? Number two, where is Kamala Harris in all this? Remember, there are two Californians, and that there would be a lot of divided loyalties here in California if that were to happen. The last time we had a number of Californians competing for a nomination for president was when Nixon, Bill Noland, and Goody Knight all were potential Republican candidates for president in 1960. Noland and Knight were eliminated by election losses in 58, and Nixon emerged in that game of musical chairs in the right place at the right time. But I can tell you, in the case of Harris and Newsom, it would be a battle royal here. And of course, we discussed the other day the question of Dianne Feinstein and what happens if she departs. All these questions in California politics may well have a bearing on national affairs.
Okay, I see a lot of things in the chat, from everything from Newsom is a disgrace to Newsom would make a good senator. So I think he comes with a lot of baggage, as you mentioned. And I'm reminded of the commercial the Republicans trotted out in the last gubernatorial election, where they had sound and clips of Newsom saying, like it or not, right, regarding how he was going to proceed with gay marriage. Like it or not, this is the way it's going to be. And, you know, his way or the highway kind of thing. So that's probably something that will be resurrected as well.
But he proved to be ahead of the curve.
He did.
And today, same-sex marriage is accepted by the overwhelming majority of the American people. The Republicans have a problem. They're behind the curve on a lot of different issues. You were talking about guns earlier. Let me just point out to you that as long as the Republicans control the House of Representatives, it doesn't matter that the Senate will probably, Dianne Feinstein reintroduced the bill dealing with the semi-automatic and automatic weapons. That will probably pass the Senate. It will die in the House. The question is, at what point do the American people stand up and say enough? And the NRA still has, with all their internal problems, still reigns supreme when it comes to the Republicans. And so, again, it's another serious question. If I were managing the Democrats' national campaign, I would do it on issues. I would say, where do you stand? Where do the American people stand? Because a majority of the American people stand with the Democrats on major issues. And that is the advantage. Although the question of personalities in presidential politics are very clear. And I think we're going to see that one other quick point. Now, you just heard the whole business in Florida with DeSantis and the whole question of a Black Studies program and his decision on that.
Yeah.
Let me assure you that is going to rouse anger in so many different places. Now, he's going to get support for it too. But my best guess is, if the Democrats stick to the issues and they define them clearly. One other, I know we've got time elements, but I want to just throw this out as long as we've got Jim here as well.
Yeah.
Social Security and Medicare. The Republicans are talking about cuts to Social Security and Medicare. And I can assure you, if that were to happen, it would be a disaster. Now, Donald Trump has said no cuts to Social Security, no cuts to Medicare, which puts him at odds with his congressional Republicans. Although, to his credit, Mitch McConnell in the Senate has said we're not going to touch Medicare, we're not going to touch Social Security. But listen to Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy is talking about cuts, and now that they have to deal with a whole question of the raising the debt ceiling, the only place the Republicans can go, because they're not going to hit defense spending, they're not going to hit that. The only place they have to go are Social Security and Medicare. And I read a report yesterday that McCarthy is now talking about making changes in or reducing. And if that happens, all bets are off. I really believe that there are issues the American people care deeply about. And if I were running the Democratic National Campaign, I would emphasize the issues where a majority of Americans agree with the Democrats and disagree with the Republicans.
I feel like I've just had a mini John Rothman program on former Station X. That's been wonderful. Thank you so much, John Rothman, for being with us. I can't thank you enough.
And Jim, thank you, Jim.
Hey, great talking to you. Great talking
Hopefully
to you.
we'll see you next Wednesday for a little more.
I look forward to it with anticipation.
Excellent. Thank you, John Rothman.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.